Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our job webinar for April. We're so happy. April, actually, it's March. Welcome, everybody. We're happy that you're here. My name is Cindy Cummings. I'm a volunteer for Austin Up. And one of the things that we do is we provide webinars for people who are job seekers. And we're so happy that you all are here. What you see up right now is a flyer for an event that we have coming up. We're super excited that we finally are going to be able to do in-live events. And this particular event is going to be April 6th. It will be from 10 to 12, and it's going to be at Affinity at Wells Branch. If you're not familiar with Affinity, they are over 55 senior living community, apartment community, and they have been gracious enough to host our event. And it's just one of the ways that we hope that we can help job seekers meet with employers who are looking for people who are looking for jobs. And our sponsor for the event is AARP. They have been a huge sponsor of all of our events that are associated with people who are seeking jobs who are over 50. We want to thank AARP. We also have some other major sponsors. They are Seniorific News, United Healthcare, Turnkey Transitions, Brookdale at Home, and Heavenly Care. So we're super excited about this event. We're actually going to be having 4 in-live events. And the intention with the in-live events is to have the opportunity for people in different geographic areas be able to meet with employers who are looking for employees in that area. So this particular event will be in North Austin. And then later on in the year, let me just look at my schedule. We have an event that will be at Solea. Solea is located in Cedar Park, and that will be on May 11th. We're also going to have an event on September 14th that will be at Shalom Austin. That's on Hart Lane. That'll be September 14th. And then October 19th, we hope to have an event. We will have an event, and it'll be in the southern part of the city. But what we like about these events is that you actually can be face-to-face. You're going to be able to talk about yourself to the people who are actually looking for people to place into positions. And we also have some great speakers. We're really looking forward to having 2 speakers. They're going to be talking about subjects that will help you in finding your new position. So at Affinity, they have a beautiful theater, and our speakers will be in the theater. So we hope that you can join us. We do ask that you pre-RSVP. It's not required, but it will just help us just with space requirements and things like that. If you happen to be a business and you are looking for job seekers, we are looking for sponsors. So please go to Austin Up and you can find out more information there. So Austin Up, what is Austin Up? Well, I'm a volunteer with Austin Up, and we are a nonprofit. And our vision is to create a region that responds to aging as a dynamic rather than a stagnant force. We are all aging all the time, and we want to make Central Texas a place that supports each of us as we age. Austin is #1 in lots of things. You've probably been reading about all the wonderful companies that are coming here, also reading about housing and things like that. But we're not #1 necessarily when it comes to employment for older workers. So Austin Up, one of our goals is to help to enlighten employers about the value of multi-generational workplaces. And we hold these events. Right now, you're on our webinar, and we're going to be holding 6 webinars throughout 2022. We've already held 2, so we've got a couple more to come. And we also are doing the in-job presentations or in-job events, in-person events. So our hope is to repurpose a long career to pursue new interests, help older adults to navigate the new technology involved in resume submittal, and also to maintain self-confidence during our job search. So we're super excited that you're here today. Let's see, we wanted to also talk about just in general Austin Up. We have some other events that we've been working on. You may or may not know, but May is Older Americans Month, and we are planning an event for Older Americans Month. The details are not yet figured out yet, but we will have all that done here in the next couple of weeks. And once we have that information out, we'll be able to get it out to everybody who's on our mailing list. Speaking of, if you'd like to be on our mailing list, you can go to our website and you can register there. And then you'll be able to get a monthly email. We actually have a newsletter that we'll be sending out in April. It'll have lots of great information. So we hope that you'll register for that. Our next speaker is going to be April 19th, and that speaker is going to be Steve Harper. And his title is Define Your Legacy by the Way You Ripple. So we're really excited to have him come, and he will be talking on April 19th. If you're interested in our past webinars, you can go to our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, and you can go there and you can see lots of different speakers who have spoken on many different kinds of topics. One of our most recent was talking about how to work remotely and how to work from your RV, for example. So that was really interesting. We've also had lots of different entities that help people look for jobs speak to. We've had Austin Community College come on and talk about their help with older Americans looking for work. So please do go to our YouTube channel, and we have lots of great information there too. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. And Chip, come on in when you can. Chip Sampson. Well, first off, he is on the board of Austin Up. We want to thank him for all of his time. He has been, hey Chip.
Hey, you can see me.
Yeah, I can see you.
Oh, good.
He has
Can you
been
hear
very, we can hear you, and you look fabulous too.
Well, thank you.
We're good. So Chip is on our board, and he has been particularly passionate about helping older workers find work. So we're so happy to have his background on our board. We want to thank you for that. But he has 20 years of experience in the professional services and project team placement industry. And during that time, he has developed long-term business relationships with a number of employers and a network of contracts. Prior to that, he served 11 years in management roles over customer service and sales-focused companies in the music and audio industry. He currently serves as the internship chairperson for the Austin Community College Continuing Education Vendor Advisory Board and on the board of directors for Austin Up, a nonprofit focused on quality of life issues for Austin residents. Self-described as a teacher and creator, he has developed a series of programs based around the employment puzzle. And today, the concept is designed to help job seekers put all the pieces together to more effectively reach their desired employment goals through a systematic approach with networking as the central principle. He has helped thousands of job seekers prepare and promote their credentials to potential employers. And Chip, let me just, before we get started, just let everybody know that we have a question and answer area. If you kind of scroll down with your mouse towards the very bottom, question and answer should pop up, as would chat. And if you have any questions and answers or questions, you can ask them there. And if you have anything that you'd like to put into the chat, you can put that in there too. So without further ado, welcome, Mr. Sampson.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
A couple things about that in terms of there's the raise the hand and then the chat. Is the raise the hand the questions and answers, or is there something else?
Raise the hand. You could raise the hand, but we typically don't pull people in a webinar. Yeah. So
Okay,
people just go into the chat and ask a question. They can do it there. Yeah, it's a little different than meetings. So it kind of got a little fancy with webinars here. So
I see the Q&A.
Yeah.
But it looks like I can't have both open at the same time.
Well, you don't have to worry about it because I'll be monitoring it, and I'm going to feed you any questions that people might ask. So you don't have to worry about it at all.
Okay.
I'll keep track of that.
Okay. Yeah. And I encourage, as we go through this, it's a pretty quick presentation, I think, 30 minutes, maybe 40 if I'm chatty. But feel free to ask questions at any point along the way if you have a question, or write your questions down and save them up. Hopefully you all have a pen and paper there handy. And the first thing that I want to say and re-emphasize to you is that on the 19th of April, Steve Harper is going to talk. I've seen him talk twice now, and he's really dynamic, and I would put that on your calendar and be there.
Excellent.
And then the previous one we had was Camille Attell that talks about remote work. And I don't remember her website offhand, but you could certainly look up Camille Attell or remote work, something. I can't remember that. Anyway, look up remote work and she's likely to pop up. She's got years of experience. So I hope that in this short time that we're going to go through this interview puzzle presentation, that it helps all of you to gain a different perspective on the interview process than maybe you already had. Hopefully there's at least one or two takeaways. It'd be wonderful if the whole thing was an epiphany for you, but we'll see how that goes. Let me go ahead and share the screen and get confirmation that you can see the interview puzzle on your screen.
Excellent. And I'm going to go away, Chip, and then I'll
Yeah.
just be here and I'll ask questions as I see them or as it's appropriate. So
Okay,
I'm here helping you out. Don't be afraid.
Okay, and everybody, I'll try not to be, but everyone can see the interview puzzle on the screen?
Not yet. Cannot
Oh,
see.
boy.
I can't see it. Oh, there we go. Okay,
Oh.
I'm going away.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So as Cindy said in that bio, that introduction, one of the programs that I've developed is something called the employment puzzle. And I look at it, I look at kind of approaching the job market in a couple of different ways. The employment puzzle is really the front end of this, and what you would do to get prepared to even go out and look for a job. And I'll tell you a little bit about what the employment puzzle is just real quickly before we jump into the interview. It's really based off of 3 key pillars, which is who's in your network. You'll recall she said networking is kind of a core principle in that. What's your story and what value do you bring? And where those things all intersect, you will get a very clear picture of the types of jobs you should be pursuing. I think that one of the most common things I see when people are looking for work, if they don't have a really clear focus on what they're after, is you kind of just bounce around from one thing to the next that you see posted and say, oh, I'd like to do that. Let me go apply for that. And then you wonder when you do online applications, why the response is so minimal. It's because they receive thousands of resumes and yours may or may not stand out in that process. It's nothing personal against you. So what I try to teach in the employment puzzle is you need to more clearly understand not only what you want to do, but who values that. And then you build out a network and you start chasing those people in those jobs. And so that's where your ideal job sits, is in the middle of where all those things intersect. So what we're going to talk about today, though, is you've already done all that work. You've approached the market. You're getting job interviews now. How do you solve the interview puzzle? How do you basically go into that interview and take control? And I don't know if we can have people respond in the chat real quick to a question I have. I don't think we set up a quiz. So I want to know, what is the primary emotion that you feel as you approach an interview and either walk in, or these days it's video, or start or begin the interview?
So I'm monitoring the chat and I will let you know if people chat.
Okay.
Thus far, nothing. But if I was interviewing, I would think fear. I would just be afraid.
That's a pretty common one. When I've asked this before, I would expect that to be one of the primary ones. And it does come up a lot. Nervous is the other thing. I see someone said excitement. Hopefully that's positive excitement. I'm excited to go in and talk to someone. And apprehension. These are all perfect words for the way the majority of people approach interviews. Some people have a very positive thought process and approach to an interview, but typically that's only when they either are somewhat familiar with what they're about to step into. Either they know the person or they know the company, or they know the work and the job very well. Others, the nervousness, the apprehension, the fear really comes from not being certain what you're about to walk into and what you're about to be asked. And this is where I think some of the tips that we're going to talk about will help you not only to prepare for an interview, but to take control of that interview, which is really where you start, winning job offers on a regular basis. So I'm going to start off with 3 quotes, and this is a game to guess who said it. Named must be your fear, before banish it you can. Just the way that's written is kind of a clue. Anyone know who said that?
I'm monitoring it. I don't see anybody. Yoda.
Yoda is the one who said it. Absolutely.
Good job, Melissa and Sandy.
Yes. It's a classic Yoda line. And that's kind of the thing when we talk about fear, apprehension, et cetera, when it comes to going into an interview, you have to embrace that fear and understand what it is, what's making you nervous or fearful. And then you have to come up with a plan to overcome that before you ever even begin the interview, or at least severely minimize the feeling. So the next one is doubt is the precursor to fear. This is one of my favorite crazy people.
Na, 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 na.
This is a tougher one.
Nothing.
You would have had to have seen the movie, and the line would have to have just jabbed you in the face when he said it. It's Alex Honnold. If anyone's ever seen this movie, the movie's called Free Solo, and Alex Honnold is the first person to ever scale El Capitan in Yosemite National Park, 3,200 feet of sheer rock face, using absolutely no ropes or anything. He just climbed it with his hands and that little chalk bag that's hanging off the back of his belt there. To me, that's insane. In this photo, he's probably a couple thousand feet up anyway. One slip and that's it. The movie's really not going to have a good ending. But what is fascinating about this movie and Alex and how he talks about getting ready for this is he said, if you doubt what your abilities or your capabilities are, you shouldn't even step onto the wall in the first place. And so, because that's kind of what gives you some of that fear. And when we go into interviews, I think some of that fear that we have is doubt about how well will we do? Will we answer all their questions? And there's ways to prepare. I think he said he spent 12 years preparing to do this one climb that he did on one day. And he did a lot of them with ropes and everything so that he knew exactly what he was getting into. So my point is, you have to prepare ahead of time for interviews, and you have to prepare really pretty thoroughly to eliminate any doubt or apprehension or fear. The next one is to thine own self be true. Also kind of an easy one, I think. Anyone know who said that?
I'm looking. Hamlet?
Pretty much, yeah. It's a Willie Shakespeare thing. Yep. Does anyone know the second half of that particular line? Do we have any Shakespeare authorities here? Because the second half of that line is something I never knew until like a year ago. And it just kind of blew me away and ties in nicely to this interview process once you know what it is. The second half of to thine own self be true is, and you cannot be false to any other man. And so the point that I want to make there is you have to clearly understand yourself, what you're capable of, what you bring to the table when you go into an interview, so that you can give the best representation of yourself in that interview. And I've done thousands of interviews over 20 plus years. And I'll tell you that if I ask a question and someone starts to make up a response, I know it almost from the first sentence that they say, just by delivery and confidence and the way they present themselves. And it's amazing at that point as the interviewer, and you should know this, being on the other side of the table. At that point, as the interviewer, I've kind of got two choices. I can call them on it, or I can keep asking them really challenging questions and see if they just keep making up more and more, which means I'm not interested in bringing them on board. So it's a really good way to quickly lose control of an interview and not get the job. So be aware of what you can do, what you're capable of, what your strengths are, and talk to those strengths when you're in an interview, and you will come across as a much stronger candidate than if you try to make things up. So what are the interview types? Almost always you're going to have a phone interview first, and don't discount the preparation that you need to do for a phone interview. You want to prepare for that the same as you would an in-person or a video interview. These days, face-to-face interview, not so much. There's probably still some places that do it. Hopefully we'll get back to that at some level, although it sure looks like the employment market is very much focused on virtual and remote work right now. Obviously, there are some jobs where that can't happen, but the last type of interview is a video interview, and it doesn't matter which one of these three it is. There's probably 4 basic formats for those interviews. It's either one-on-one, you talking with someone else, one-on-two, you talking with a couple of people that are involved in the hiring decision, a panel interview, which can be anywhere from 3 to, I've known people that have been on 10-person panels, which when you're in person, that's particularly fun because usually they sit you in a chair by yourself across on the other side of the room with a line of 10 people just firing questions at you. And then rotational is where it might be one-on-one interviews, but they kind of move you from one thing to the next, one person to the next. And those can take an hour or 2 to all day, depending on how they do it. So you want to think about that when you get to the interview stage, because you want to know which of these types of interviews is it going to be so that you can best prepare for it. Can anyone tell me in this picture who's the interviewer and who's the candidate? Right or the left?
No answers, but I'm thinking I can't figure it out.
You shouldn't be able to.
Okay.
Because there really is no difference between the two. I think one chair is slightly tilted further back, but I don't know why that would be one or the other. The thing about this image that I want to drive home is, if you do nothing else, mentally, you need to prepare yourself for the fact that when you go into an interview with somebody, you are equals, right? They really only have the upper hand on one thing, and that is that they already work at that company, and they may be the person who decides whether you go to work there or not. So I think people put too much stock in the fact that that person has that level of control over their future and destiny. And the reality is that's not true. You have just as much control over that as they do. Oftentimes, they are real busy with their day-to-day job, and they just kind of waltz into an interview, ask a bunch of questions, and go back out. And all they're looking for is who impressed them the most. They're not necessarily better prepared than you are as an interviewee for that interview. And so you want to know and understand that and approach it as if you're equals. And if you've done all your preparation, then it will become obvious pretty quick that you know what you're doing and what you're talking about when it comes to the topic you're being interviewed for. And that you'll start to become equals, and you'll actually even wrestle away some control of that interview from the interviewer. Let's see, what do I have next? So if you're going into an interview, never just accept the interview time and say, all right, great, I'll be there. You need to have a plan. And that plan should consist of a few things. You need to confirm the interview details. You'd be amazed how few people actually do this. And we'll talk about each one of these things and how to go about doing it. But it really does make a big difference in how you prepare and how you approach that interview. You need to gather information, either from the company or from other sources prior to the interview. You need to establish your goals for that interview, and you should absolutely have specific goals that you want to achieve by the time that interview is over. And you need to confirm what your questions are going to be. And those are both the ones you're asked and the ones you will ask. And then you want to somehow, in doing these things, these first four, see if you can mentally prepare yourself for how you might take control of that interview. So let's talk first about confirming the interview details. And as I said, it's amazing to me how few people actually do this. When somebody makes a request of you, whether it's via email, whether you're on the phone with them, however it happens, to come in for an interview or to be available on video for an interview or on the phone, you want to get all of their contact information first off and say, thanks, yes, I can make it at that time. I'd like to send you an email and ask you some questions about the interview and the interview format, or have the questions ready, which you should have them written down and ready to go for each and every time you're ever asked to do an interview. And what you want to confirm are, can you tell me what the names and titles of everybody that will be involved in the interview? This is how you know whether it's a one-on-one, a one-on-two, a panel interview, etc. Ask for that information. You want to know the interview format. Will it be one-on-one? Will it be panel? Will it be rotational? And then any additional details that you might need for preparation. And you might want to ask, it depends on the type of job, right? What materials you might need to prepare, but do I need to prepare a coding sample if it's a programming job? Do I need to give you examples or copies of certifications if there are certifications that you have that are associated with the job? Do I need to provide any testing or educational confirmation or documentation? You want to, and then you also want to ask, can you tell me what types of questions will be asked? Are there technical questions? Are there behavioral questions? Just ask them anything that comes to mind as to what might go on or take place in that interview. They won't always give you all that information. Sometimes the people you're talking to who are setting up the interviews don't have that information. That's okay. Just get as much information as you can up front, because it will inform how you prepare for that interview. So the next step is to gather information. And when I go through the employment puzzle, I talk about researching companies before you ever even apply to those companies. And the reason is you're trying to, again, hone in on only pursuing and chasing after those types of jobs that you know you're a fit for and you know you bring the value that they're looking for. So you should already, if you get to that interview stage, already have had quite a bit of research on that company done. But now that you've confirmed some details about the interview and what you might be asked and the names and titles of the people in the interview, you could still do some additional research. You can find out, look them all up on LinkedIn and see not only what they do or what they say about their current position, but what sorts of things have they posted about? What other places did they work before they came to work at that company? And what you're looking for is, do I know anything about them or about the topics that they're posting about or about the companies that they've worked at before, including friends and or people I may know that have worked at those companies, and just write all that detail down. And I'll tell you why that can come into play later on. And so you want to just continue to gather more information as you hone in closer and closer to that job and that interview. And then amp up your targeted networking, which is kind of the what I was saying about looking up their profile on LinkedIn, particularly if you see a company they worked at before and you know somebody that knows them, or or you know somebody that's worked at that company also. Reach out to them and say, hey, I have an interview coming up on Thursday of this week, and you know, so and so is going to be in that interview, and I know they work there. Do you know anything about them? It might be insignificant, but you might learn something very significant that will be helpful in that interview. Let's see, what is next? Establish your goals. And you heard me say it when I talked about that. You need to have goals when you go into an interview. So the first and foremost thing to establish is, now that you're going to the interview stage, you need to go back and, you know, go through that job description again, go through your resume again, go through all of your skills, and really pull out what are the strengths that you have that are referenced in that job description. And there's a variety of research on jobs and job descriptions. First of all, 99% of job descriptions are what they grabbed off the shelf or, you know, out of file storage before on another position, and they either used exactly the same thing or they tweaked it a little bit for what they're doing. So sometimes the job description is not even accurate to what they're wanting you to do. But most times, at least some of the main skills are correct. And you need to understand your strengths there. And those are the things that you want to focus on in the interview. Not on most job descriptions, you might not have 100% of what they're asking for when you submit. And in fact, the studies show that men are more likely to submit when they have less than half of the skills. Women are they need to have about 70% of the skills to be more confident in submitting for that. The reality is, you can have 2 or 3 of the main skills and none of the others, and still potentially shine in that interview and do better than other candidates. And one of the ways to do that is to understand what you're good at, understand the places where you have challenges, and continually try to steer that interview towards where you're good, the things you're good at. What you do want to do with the things that you're less than certain about is try to think of a place or a situation or a story where you can relate a similar skill to what they're asking for. And so when you're asked about that one skill where you're not feeling as confident, you can say, well, I don't really have much experience there, but I do have experience with this. I think that they're similar. Here's an example. And get confirmation from them if they believe the same thing after you go through that. So that's the strengths, and focus on your strengths. The second thing is when you're in that interview, one of your primary goals should be to probe to find the problem to solve. And I say this because the reason any company posts a job in the first place is they've got a problem to solve. McDonald's posts a job for someone to work back in the kitchen because they have to flip so many burgers and put them on buns and wrap them up and put them out before, in a given day to meet the demand of the people walking through the door. And the CEO of Hewlett Packard has to, meet the goals of the company and please the shareholders, right? They're two completely different jobs with two completely different skill sets, but both of them clearly have a problem that has to be solved. And so the quicker you can find out by the questions you ask, what is the problem you're trying to solve by the person in this position, the quicker you can get to, again, emphasizing your strengths and talking about how you have solved similar problems at other companies that they have. So I don't know that I have a clear example right off the top of my head, but let's just say you're in sales, right? And you were selling computers at one place, but now they're asking you to sell printers, big copier printer things. And the mechanics of selling are the same. So it doesn't matter that you necessarily know computers or printers. What matters is their problem is they have to reach out and connect with as many customers as possible and get a lot of activity in the pipeline and then, close deals. So you have to understand what that problem is and play your strengths to that problem. And then the other is establish a human connection. The quicker you can do this is not always easy to do. Not everybody that you interview with is open to establishing a human connection. Some are very, methodical about the way they go about doing interviews. But when I mentioned about researching people's LinkedIn profiles, maybe if you just know what school they went to or another company they worked at, maybe they worked at a company you worked at different times. Anything that you can find in that research that you've done ahead of time to establish a human connection, and just have that in the back of your mind. And maybe before the interview kind of even gets ramped up to them asking questions, you could call that person out and say, oh, I see you went to such and such school and studied in the same curriculum I did. Did you ever have such and such as a professor? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but you never know what it is that's going to get that connection. Sometimes you can look around their office if you're being interviewed in their office, or if it's a video interview where they're sitting in their office, and see something on the wall that is a painting that's done by the same artist that you have a painting at your house. Anything. Doesn't matter. Just try to find something to establish a human connection. They'll begin to see you not as employer and employee, but they'll start to picture you as coworker when you can do that. And then this last thing is where it really starts to shine, and that is you want to, as quickly as you can in the interview process, try to turn it into a conversation. And what I mean by that is if you just sit there and let them fire a question at you, do your best to answer it, and then turn around and just sit there and wait for the next question, this is not a conversation. This is an interview, as most interviews typically go. A conversation is they ask you a question, you answer it as best you can, and you say, so tell me about that particular skill and how it's applied in this role. Now they're starting to tell you about the job, and then you could follow up that with, oh yeah, we did something exactly like that at the company I was at before. Here's a story and how we did that. When you approach the interview that way, it starts to go from them firing questions at you and you shooting answers back to, we're having a conversation here as if we were working together and trying to solve a problem, which, by the way, goes back to the probe to find the problem to solve. You use those lines of questioning to find out, to get at and find out what is that problem. And then I think, is there another? No, I think you just turn it into a conversation and you're good. If you can do those things. Confirm your questions. I mentioned that there's two types of questions: questions to answer and questions to ask. You absolutely should think about, based off their job description and just what you know about that type of work, what kinds of questions can I be expected to answer? And what I want and expect you to do is to write out those questions, as many of them as you can. I typically have a bank of about 100 questions that I might expect to be asked for any type of job that I apply for. I kind of narrow my search down to certain types of jobs, but I have 100 questions that I've already written out the answers for. And in those answers, I've written out kind of stories that go along with the answers. And I'll sit there and I'll just, for the 2 or 3 days leading up to the interview, I'll just run through those questions and practice and rehearse those answers in my head. The way I think of this, and the way you should start thinking of this is preparation you can do up at the front end and continually practice the same way that a Academy Award-winning actor or actress would approach their job. They don't just get handed the script and then say action, roll the camera, and they just reel off their lines perfectly. They get that script way ahead of time. They study, practice the delivery of the lines, and are really prepared by the time they flip the camera on and say action. And you need to think of your interview as the same way. Not that it's an act, because you have to be true to yourself, right? But you've at least rehearsed the responses to the most common questions you're going to get. And then the second set of questions is questions to ask. Now, I've had some people tell me that they go into interviews thinking about and trying to prepare for the questions they might have to answer, but they never prepare questions to ask. And so when you get around to that point in the interview where they say, well, that's all the questions we have. What questions do you have for us? If you don't have any questions to ask, there's a 99% chance you will not get that job, because there's going to be some candidate who's going to come in with several questions to ask. And remember, I said you're equals in the interview process. You should have just as many questions for them about the job, about the environment, about the skills they need, about the company, as they have for you. In fact, almost to the point where you're thinking, maybe they might want to start like kicking you out because they got to move on to the next interview or to whatever else they have to do that day. There's nothing wrong with asking a bunch of questions to get clarity for yourself on whether or not this is the kind of place you want to work. That's another thing that I think people don't typically think about when going into a lot of job interviews. But I think it's happening more and more, is they're thinking, is this even the kind of culture and environment that I want to work in? And you should be asking those questions to verify that. So you're going to be asked a variety of types of questions: behavioral questions, situational questions. And in both of these, behavioral is just going to be, tell me about a time when you struggled to get your work done and how did you do it, right? What did you do to overcome that? That's where you should already have a story written out. You should always have a question like this thought out in your head, a good story written out, and that story should be, what was the situation? What was the action you took to correct it? And what was the outcome? And the outcome should be positive, by the way. So you want to have those kinds of stories to be able to tell. Same thing for situational questions. Tell me about a time when you didn't have all of the tools and support you needed to get your work done. How did you approach that? You should have a story to go along with that, where you did figure out a way to muddle through and get the work done and have a good positive result. Technical questions. If you're being interviewed for a technical position, those you don't necessarily want to do stories with. You want to do facts and examples. So if you're being interviewed for a technical role, make sure you have those questions kind of outlined and you have facts and examples that you can reference in your responses. And then a lot of times you'll get asked close-ended questions where it's kind of a yes or no answer maybe. And you want to give an answer and then never just let that sit there. Follow it up with an open-ended question. So have you ever programmed in Java, let's say for a programming role? The answer is it should already be on the resume and they should know that. So it's a simple question, but your answer should not be just, yes, I have, and then wait for the next question. Yes, I have. Tell me about the Java programming here. What are the specific Java related tools that you're using? That's just an example. It's not the best example, but it's the one I could come up with. Open-ended questions, you want to do the opposite. So if they ask you an open-ended question that can be answered in any way, be careful not to go rambling off on the answer. Give an answer and then try to close that down by saying, does that answer the question, or is that the answer you were expecting to hear? You want them to give you a closed response back. And if the response is no, then you follow that with an open-ended. Well, what else is it that you're interested in knowing about that I may have done? And we can talk about that. So think about and study and learn what are close-ended, what are open-ended questions so that you have an idea how to respond to those. That also is what turns it from an interview, questions and answers, into a conversation. When you know that there's an opportunity to ask an open-ended question, you want to take it because that's them now giving you information about the job. Let's see, where are we? Take control. That's what we wanted to do all along, right? Is take control of the interview. So stories are probably one of the best ways for you to take control of the interview, and why you should prepare your stories ahead of time in response to certain types of questions. It's a very, very powerful tool. Stories are where you actually begin to draw a mental picture for that interviewer where they can begin to see you in the position. In other words, if they ask you a question and you have a story to relate from a previous job, you can tell that story and tell them how you address that. And then don't just leave it at that. That's an opportunity to ask them an open-ended question. You tell them their story, your story, you give them that answer and say, tell me how that relates to what happens here in this job when you're faced with the same thing. Now you're getting them to give you information back, and it's again becoming a conversation. Listen closely to the questions that are being asked. Take the time to pause if you need to. You'll have hopefully a notepad there, and write down what you think are the key points of a question, particularly when you're asked these multi-part questions. And it's okay to say, I just want to make sure I get all this. Could you repeat that question and write down at least the 2 or 3 main points, because you don't want to take a multi-part question and say they asked you about sort of 3 different things. You don't want to answer just 2 of them and leave the 3rd laying there. You want to make sure that you've addressed all of them and confirm that at the end. And you want to make sure that you're answering exactly the question they asked and not some other question. Don't make up answers. I think I said that before. I still stand by it. You know, to thine own self be true. If you really don't know an answer to something, or it's a skill that they're asking you about that you're not confident in, say it. You know, I don't really have much experience there, but don't let it just sit there like that, because then that's just okay, check, no, doesn't have that experience. say, I don't really have much experience there, but here's your open-ended question opportunity. If you would, tell me how that relates or why that's important for this particular role. And now, if they start giving you information, it gives you time to do two things. Figure out in their response if you have another story that's relatable or similar to what they're looking at. Or if you have a situation where, say, you didn't know how to do something and you came in and learned in a very short period of time or ramped up to speed on it. You can tell those kinds of stories based on the response they give you back to your open-ended question. Again, I can't emphasize this more. Identify what the problem to solve is. You will control that interview if you can not only figure out what that problem is, but begin relating stories to how you've solved similar problems in other places. The interview turns to a conversation fairly quickly when you can do that. And this is an interesting study to take some interviews where you don't care if you get the job or not, and just focus on this one goal. I want to identify what that problem is to solve and figure out if I can show them how I'm capable of solving it based on something I've done previously. And you'll be surprised how many times you actually end up with an offer to a job that you don't even want. I'll throw in one other thing on that. I often try to, when I have to approach a job search, I often try to go out and get just one or two really, what I call low-hanging fruit job interviews. It's the type of position that's, financial services is a good one, right? Because it seems like financial service companies are always trying to hire people, and they bring 20 people in at a time in the hopes that 2 of them make it and the other 18 wash out. Perfect. I want to go to that interview and I want to practice at that interview. I don't care. I don't really ever want to be in the financial services business. I don't care if I get the job. I just want to practice if I can figure out what their problem is and convince them that I can solve it and get a job offer. So it's a good way to practice before you go into the real interview for the job that you want. And again, in order to take and keep control of the interview, don't focus on what you're not strong at that's in the job description or what they're asking you about. Focus on your strengths. Even if they ask you about something that you're not as strong at, see if there's a way to bring that conversation back to one of your strengths. And then the last thing, and probably the most important that many people overlook, and that is close on next steps. I've got 3 asterisks there because you really need to approach an interview as a selling job. And I know a lot of people kind of hate the thought of selling, particularly of selling themselves, but that's exactly what an interview is. And before you're done with the interview, and they're done asking you questions and you're done asking them questions, your last question should be, so tell me, and you can be as bold as you want. Tell me this, based on what we've talked about today, is there any reason why you wouldn't hire me? Pretty forward question, but it gives you the opportunity to give any additional information if needed. And if they say, no, we like what we hear, then the next question should be, well, then tell me, what are the next steps? Will there be more interviews? Should I expect a job offer? And again, that's a very forward question, but in a selling situation, these are closes. You have to try to close. Oftentimes they have very eloquent ways to put you off. Well, I have to circle back with HR and then someone will reach out to you, blah, blah, blah. But you can press it a little bit to try to get an answer. And particularly if you're in a situation where you got 2 or 3 things going on, say, well, okay, that's great. I can wait to hear from HR, but I do have 2 other interviews this week, and I'm just trying to find out, should I continue to keep you in consideration as a potential employer, or should I not worry about that? you want to get a yes or no before you leave the interview in some form or fashion. And I think that's it. That conversation in an interview, when you turn it into a conversation, it equals being in control of the interview, which is what this whole thing is about, right? How to be in control. And by the way, I do like beer, and lots of other people do too.
Especially in Austin with all of the breweries that we have popping up, right? Well,
You
Chip,
know,
we have a couple. Oh, I'm sorry.
I've actually picked up some clients around the conversation about beer, just because we both like beer. Oh, I had some other tips. I'll go through them real quick. Exercise, eat and drink properly before an interview. I highly encourage meditation and visualization to visualize being in that interview and answering questions. And I always do 3 deep breaths before I walk into an interview. It clears the mind and relaxes you. So if anyone wants to get a hold of me and ask any other questions or follow-up, I'm absolutely happy to help out in any kind of challenges you have in your job search or interviewing, or if you just want to connect and find out more about what the employment puzzle is about, just reach out to me at this email address and I'll connect back with you.
Chip, thank you so much. Great information. We do have some questions and we've got about 2 minutes. So do you mind if I ask them real quick?
You know, I'm good to stay as long as we need to, but yes.
Okay, great. So one of them is, when I've asked who I am being interviewed by, I frequently don't hear back. This type of inquiry just sets the HR person against you from the beginning. What's your thought on that?
So I have a few. One of the things in the employment puzzle that I say is, when you're trying to reach out and connect with people at companies, HR shouldn't be your first point of contact. And in defense of people in HR, they have a lot on their plate. They're trying to shuffle lots of paper and get that out to many different managers and sort things out. And their fear is they're supposed to be the gatekeepers, right, to the managers that are hiring for the job. So their fear is, if I give you those names, then you're just going to reach out and try to connect with them or contact them.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Sure. So there could be, if it's HR that you're dealing with, you could maybe just rephrase the way you're saying it. You could say, in order, I always try to prepare as best I can for an interview ahead of time. And part of that preparation is understanding the types of people that I'll be talking to. I don't need to necessarily get their names and information so that I'm going to reach out to them. I'll respect that boundary and not reach out to them. But I want to know their names and their titles, because I want to understand a little bit about where they're coming from and what they might be asking me. So that's why I ask those things. And is there, I'd even say, is there a policy against giving out that information? The other thing is, if they won't give you those names, then the next thing you want to do is, if you can get at least the department and the title, just tell me, okay, I understand you don't want me to have the names, but can you just tell me, so I know who's going to be in the interview, the departments they're in and the titles.
That makes sense.
Then you can sleuth that through LinkedIn or some other source to try to figure out who are the directors of sales at such and such company, right?
So we've got another question, and it says, if 35 plus people can't find jobs in Austin, why can't we just move to another city, state, or a planet?
Well, oxygen is the planet thing. I think that's the biggest reason why you can't do that. City, state, I don't know that, Austin has challenges, and in any high tech environment like Austin, or like the Carolinas, or like Silicon Valley, you know, where there's a lot of high tech, there seems to be this mindset of, you know, hiring youth, let's say, and youth can be, you know, anyone 50 or under, but that's not the case everywhere. And there are people that are hiring in Austin, and I think we're making some strides to make that more and more of a reality. And right now it's a candidates market. Companies can't find enough people. So again, all you really have to do is convince them that you bring the skills they need, and hopefully they're going to give you a look. Now, you can't get around companies that you know, have blinders on and only will do that. One way that I figure out, does a company look like they'll hire me, is a lot of times on their website they have the picture of everyone out in front of the building, you know, and
Oh yeah.
big group picture. And I'll just look at that and say, are there any people that look like me in there?
Well,
And if there are,
yeah,
there doesn't have to be a lot, but if there's just a few, then probably they would consider that. And if everybody looks like they just graduated high school, and you know, maybe that's not going to work, but you could do that. But moving to another city, I don't think the problems are unique. I think it's a common situation a lot of places. And then when you start moving to other cities, your question is, do they really have a lot of jobs and work there, depending upon what the city is? So it's not always a solution. But what I would say is, there's so much remote work now that you can think beyond just what can I find in Austin. Cindy, we were sharing this before I got on, is that I kind of have these two jobs now. Well, one company's in Nashville and the other company's in California. And I'll just be working for them remotely from wherever I am on the road. And so the work environment has changed. You can look outside of Austin, but that doesn't mean you have to move outside of Austin.
Right. It's exciting. It's a really exciting time, I think. And I think COVID in many ways helped to fuel that work from home kind of environment, which makes it really nice for people.
You know, it's funny because I worked at places where I would say, you know, I'm sitting in front of a computer all day. There's really no reason why I couldn't do this sitting at my house. And yet the mindset was, no, we can't do that. I mean, it's just, you know, everybody's got to be here in the office. There's this whole camaraderie culture, blah, 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 right? Boy, COVID hit. I worked for the state on a contract when COVID hit. Talk about someplace that was like, no, you got to come in and you need to be here at 8 and you got to stay here till 5.
Right.
Which everybody pretty much did. They showed up at 8 and they left right at 5. And the thing about that is, as soon as COVID hit, they had to send everybody home.
Right.
And all of a sudden, all that stuff, the excuses they had about the technology isn't there, we can't do this, they all went away because they had to do it. And they can't put that genie back in the bottle. It's now clear that you absolutely can do that.
Right.
And I highly recommend that most people pursue that, especially if they're thinking, I can't find what I'm looking for in Austin. Start looking other places.
Right. Well, Chip, you are a wealth of information. You've always helped our attendees, and we know that you will forever live in our YouTube channel, so people can come back and watch this later. But we're so appreciative, and we just thank you. Thanks for coming today, and we look forward to seeing everybody in a couple weeks for our next speaker. So thank you again, Chip.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks,
Goodbye,
everybody.
everyone.